Late autumn in Boston, a chill wind snaked through the rows of trees, the pavement gleaming with yellow lamplight after a light rain. People hurried past one another, yet the city's pace seemed to slow just a bit. In that atmosphere, both gentle and cold, I sat remembering the night of our third wedding anniversary, the first night I understood that some marriages, however brightly lit from the outside, have been rotting from within for a very long time. My name is Eleanor, I am 33, and I work as a finance manager for a major urban development corporation in Boston. Outsiders often describe me as a capable woman. When the books cross my desk, it is difficult for even a single dollar to go amiss. At the office, I am used to working with data, with deadlines, with balance sheets that are not allowed to be off. But when I come home, what I need is very simple: a hot meal, a considerate husband, a home that is not too loud. My husband is Ethan, 2 years my senior, a senior relationship manager for a commercial bank. Ethan has a very bright appearance. He is tall, dresses impeccably, and speaks with a measured tone, knowing just when to stop, just where to smile. He is the kind of man everyone finds instantly likable. When we first married, many people told me I was lucky. I had landed a man with a stable career who knew how to carry himself. Even I, at times, believed it. 3 years of marriage passed, and I was still the one shouldering most of the household expenses. The mortgage payments on our condo, the living costs, helping out both our parents, the majority came from my salary and savings. The condo we lived in, located in Brookline, was a case in point. When we first married, my mother gave me a substantial sum of money. I added my own savings and took out a small loan to buy it. When we were signing the deed, Ethan said that for a husband and wife to draw such clear lines felt cold. I listened and relented, telling myself that it was marital property, and putting both our names on it would keep the peace. A woman's hardship often lies in loving someone so much she assumes they love her back in the same way. That evening was our third wedding anniversary. Ethan had taken the initiative to book a table at a restaurant on a high floor, overlooking the city as it lit up. He wore a navy blue suit, his hair was neatly styled, and he was wearing the exact woody cologne I had once praised as masculine but not overpowering. The moment he saw me, he smiled. "My wife looks so beautiful tonight." I laughed and teased back, "Just tonight?" He pulled out my chair for me, his voice as sweet as honey. "Beautiful every day, but tonight is the kind of beautiful that makes a husband offer a compliment first, just to be safe." That line softened me. Not because it was so clever, but because it had been a long time, amidst the grind of work, bills, and exhausting commutes, that I had heard my husband speak to me with that gentle tone from our early days. The dinner was quite elegant: a salmon salad, hot butternut squash soup, seared steak, and a glass of red wine shimmering in the candlelight. Ethan talked about his work, asked after my mother back home, and even mentioned taking me on a vacation at the end of the year for a change of scenery. I sat and listened, my heart calming. Some men are very skilled at making their wives believe that everything is still fine, even when a storm has been brewing beneath the surface for a long time. Just as dessert was brought out, Ethan pulled a moss-green velvet box from his jacket pocket. He pushed it toward me, his eyes shining with anticipation. "Open it, Ellie." I lightly touched the lid, my heart suddenly beating faster. Inside was a necklace with a delicate green stone, a slender design. It was the exact style I had once admired in a boutique at the Prudential Center and remarked aloud that it was beautiful. I looked up at my husband, genuinely surprised. "You remembered?" Ethan smiled, wrapping his arm around the back of my chair, and personally fastened the necklace around my neck. "Of course, I did. You've worked so hard these past 3 years. I might not say it, but I see it all." As he finished, a sting came to my eyes. I am not the kind of woman who is obsessed with gifts. What moved me was the feeling of being noticed, of being seen. For a moment, I even felt guilty for being so cold to him lately without reason. But just then, Ethan's phone vibrated on the table, the screen flashing. It was just an unknown number, not saved in his contacts, yet his expression changed instantly, so fast that if I had not been sitting directly across from him, I might have missed it. He flipped the phone face down, picked up his glass of water for a sip, and then forced a smile. "Telemarketers have been calling constantly lately, so annoying." I watched his hand, his thumb tapping a silent rhythm against the glass, a habit that only appeared when he was agitated. I did not ask further. I just smiled and lowered my head, my fingers touching the pendant at my chest. Beyond the glass, the city was still a blaze of light, traffic flowing like a relentless river. Amidst the restaurant's soft piano music, I suddenly felt as if a fine thread inside me had been quietly pulled askew. Just a little. But any woman who has lived in a marriage long enough understands. Sometimes, a great crack begins with a single, small vibration from a phone. It was nearly 10 o'clock by the time we got home. On the balcony, the late autumn wind slipped through the railings, carrying the distinct chill of Boston on the cusp of winter. I took off my shoes and set my bag on a chair, while Ethan, as soon as he walked in, took off his suit jacket, draped it over his arm, and said, "I am going to take a shower. The air conditioning was on all day, and I feel sticky." I nodded. The condo was as quiet as any other night. The kitchen light cast a warm yellow glow, the countertop gleaming because I had wiped it thoroughly before leaving for work that morning. The small vase of chrysanthemums on the corner shelf still smelled faintly sweet. It was a home that, on the surface, had nothing to complain about. It was just that I could not understand why, from the moment we left the restaurant until we arrived here, the fleeting change in my husband's face when his phone rang kept replaying in my mind. Ethan went into the bathroom, the sound of the shower running steadily behind the frosted glass door. I picked up his suit jacket, intending to hang it up properly and then air it out on the balcony in the morning before sending it to the dry cleaners. It was a habit I had maintained since we married. Men who work all day often leave papers, wallets, and receipts in their jacket pockets. If I did not check, something might get forgotten and end up crumpled or wet, which would be a waste. As I slipped my hand into the inner breast pocket, I felt a soft piece of paper that had been wadded into a ball. Thinking it was the dinner receipt, I pulled it out and casually smoothed it flat on the table. It took only a few seconds for a chill to run through me. Printed clearly on the paper was the name of an online fashion accessories shop. The product description was right in the middle of the page: greenstone pendant necklace with premium alloy. The price below was $75. I stood frozen, my fingers still gripping the edge of the paper, as if letting go would cause something inside me to fall to the floor. The necklace resting on my chest still sparkled under the living room lights, looking as luxurious as it had in the restaurant. To the naked eye, anyone would think it was a carefully chosen item from a respectable boutique. But I, the woman who just an hour ago had felt her heart soften at his words. "I see you've worked so hard," now only tasted bitterness on my tongue. Truthfully, I have never been the type of woman who demands designer goods from her husband, nor do I have a habit of measuring affection by price tags. If Ethan had been honest tonight and said that he was short on cash lately but chose this for me because he thought it suited me, I might have been even happier. The pain was not in the $75. The pain was in the fact that he had looked me straight in the eye, fastened that gift around my neck himself, and orchestrated an entire elegant scene just to make me believe I was cherished. People say it is the thought that counts, and a small but genuine gift is precious. But a small gift dressed up to look grand is like smearing sand on the self-respect of the person beside you. I took a deep breath, folded the receipt back as it was, and tucked it into the suit jacket pocket. It was not that I was meek, and it was certainly not that I did not know how to be angry. It was just that working in finance for so long had given me an almost instinctual habit. Whenever I saw something unusual, I did not rush to make a scene. I needed to look one step further. A man lying about a gift on his wedding anniversary. It sounds small, but sometimes a small lie is just the lid on a pot that is already boiling over. Just as I placed the jacket on its hanger, Ethan came out, his hair still wet, the collar of his t-shirt darkened by a few drops of water. He looked at me and smiled naturally. "You have not changed yet? Still emotional from your husband's gift?" I turned and smiled back. "Yes, it was a surprise." He said, "I told you, my wife deserves to be spoiled." He stepped closer, his hand gently touching the pendant at my neck. "Is it beautiful?" I looked directly into my husband's eyes. That face was still composed, his gaze still gentle, his voice still sweet, without a single ripple. It was that very smoothness that chilled me more than the receipt in the jacket pocket. "Beautiful," I replied. "Very beautiful." Ethan smiled without another word. He went to the kitchen for a drink of water, and I stood alone in the living room, suddenly feeling as if my own answer had been spoken by a stranger. That night, I lay beside my husband but could not sleep soundly. The man beside me breathed evenly, one hand unconsciously resting on the edge of the blanket as always. That familiar posture had once given me a sense of security, but now I only felt a small thorn had just been embedded in my heart. It did not make me bleed immediately, but it was definitely lodged there. The next morning, as I was getting ready for work, I picked up Ethan's phone to check the time because mine was charging across the room. The screen lit up, revealing the password prompt. I tried our old combination, but it did not work. I tried his birthday, but that did not work either. I froze. Just the day before, Ethan had handed me his phone and asked me to reply to a text from his mother. Yet, in just one night, the password had been changed. Just then, my own phone buzzed. A message from Human Resources informed me that in the afternoon, the executive board would announce my assignment to oversee the finances for a major project in the seaport. My heart pounded with joy. This was the opportunity I had been waiting for months. I turned and called out to the dressing room, "Ethan, I have some good news this afternoon." From inside the room, his voice came back. "Okay, tell me tonight." Just 4 words. As flat as a glass of water left out overnight. I stood still for a few seconds, then silently picked up my handbag and walked out the door. In the hallway, the motion sensor light flickered on. In that pale, white light, I suddenly felt half of my joy drain away. Some marriages are strange. People live together under one roof, yet when it comes to joy or sorrow, they must bear it all alone. That morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The end of the year was always a whirlwind for the finance department. From 9 o'clock, the internal phone lines rang nonstop, and emails poured in, from reconciling credit limits to reviewing cash flow projections for the new project. I was used to that pace, so I was not flustered, but a nagging unease from the morning lingered within me. Early that afternoon, just as the message had indicated, I was called to a small conference room on the 12th floor. The CEO looked at me over her thin-framed glasses and spoke concisely. "I've decided to put you in charge of the financials for the Seaport Urban Development Project. Do a good job on this, and your path to Chief Financial Officer is practically wide open." I bowed my head in thanks, my hands clutching the notebook on my lap as waves of excitement washed over me. It was not about the title. Anyone in my profession knows that being entrusted with a major project is a symbol of trust. After all these years of hard work, a door was finally opening. Leaving the meeting, the first person I wanted to tell was my husband. I texted Ethan. "I got assigned the Seaport Project financials this afternoon. I'll probably be very busy, but I'm so happy." After sending the text, I expected him to at least call back or reply with a few heartfelt words. I waited for nearly 40 minutes. It was only when I was reviewing a capital allocation spreadsheet that my phone finally buzzed. Ethan texted, "Congrats. I am in meetings, working late tonight." That was it. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then placed my phone face down on the desk. The feeling of disappointment was not intense, but it lingered like someone lightly rubbing a thumb over sandpaper. We had been married for 3 years, this should have been joyous news to share. Yet the man who slept beside me every night replied like a polite colleague. I told myself he might really be busy, but my profession has taught me to cross-reference everything, and once a question mark forms in my mind, it is very difficult to pretend it is not there. Late that afternoon, during a 10-minute break between meetings, I opened my banking app to check the joint savings account my husband and I shared. This was an account we had reserved for major household expenses, not for everyday spending. As I looked down at the transaction history, my chest felt like it was being squeezed. There was a transfer of $5,000, made 2 days ago. The recipient was an unfamiliar name, with no memo, no note, and no indication that this was a pre-discussed transaction. I read it 3 times, but numbers were what I trusted most. Because they do not lie. And for that very reason, when they were unusual, I could not console myself by saying it must be a mistake. I called Ethan immediately. The phone rang for a long time before he picked up, his voice low, as if he were suppressing irritation. "I am busy, what is it?" I got straight to the point. "Who did you just transfer $5,000 to from our joint account?" There was a pause on the other end, then Ethan replied quickly. "Oh, that money. I lent it to a colleague in an emergency." "Why did you not tell me?" "Because it was too urgent. His mom needed heart surgery, and the hospital was demanding payment. A person's life is not a game, you know." His voice began to take on a familiar high-handed tone, the one he used whenever he wanted to shut down questions with a reason that sounded righteous. I kept my voice calm. "I am not saying you cannot help, but that is our joint money. You should have at least told me." Ethan sighed heavily, clearly losing patience. "Eleanor, sometimes you are too by the book. His mother needed saving, was I supposed to sit there and ask for permission, step by step? We can earn money back, but what if something happened to his family member?" That statement left me speechless for a few seconds. Not because I was convinced, but because I realized he was pushing me into the role of a petty, heartless wife, simply for asking about a withdrawal from a joint account I had every right to know about. I pressed on. "Then give me that colleague's phone number, so I know, in case we need to follow up later." "Why do you need to follow up?" Ethan's voice grew sharper. "I told you it was an emergency. You are acting like I am trying to scam you." I tightened my fingers on the edge of my desk. I did not say that. I just want clarity. I am in a meeting. We will talk tonight. The call ended as abruptly as if he were the one who had been offended, not me. I sat motionless in front of my computer, the hum of the air conditioning overhead, making my heart feel even colder. I knew that type of argument all too well. Instead of addressing the core issue, he was throwing up a larger value in this case, compassion, a human life, decency to shield himself, making the person asking the questions feel ashamed. Indeed. If I had said one more word, in his eyes, I would have become a woman who only cared about money, not about people. In the late afternoon, I continued working as usual, even having a meeting with the legal department for nearly an hour. But in my mind, the story of the $5,000 kept looping like a glitched message on an LED screen, flickering endlessly. That evening, Ethan came home quite late. He opened the door with a composed expression and had even stopped to buy a box of cannolis, which he placed on the table, as if a little sweetness was enough to frost over everything. I saw a new bakery opened, bought some for you to try. I looked at the box, then at my husband. Have you eaten? I ate with clients. Ethan went to take a shower. I was clearing away the clothes he had changed out of to put in the laundry hamper. In the right pocket of his trousers was a folded receipt. I opened it. It was a bill from a 5-star seafood restaurant for a party of 2. The time was from that very afternoon, the time he had texted me that he was in meetings. I placed the receipt on the counter. I no longer felt shocked, nor did I feel the kind of anger that makes you want to storm in and demand answers. I just felt as if another door inside me had quietly closed. A fake gift, a missing sum of money without a word, a very moral-sounding excuse, and now, a lavish lunch during a time he was supposed to be too busy to say more than 3 sentences to his wife. I did not dare to jump to the conclusion that Ethan was having an affair, but one thing I knew for sure, the man living with me under this roof was wearing too many faces. And the most frightening thing was not what he was hiding, but that he was hiding it with such a calm demeanor that anyone not paying close attention would think everything was still as normal as it had always been. For the next 2 days, I did not ask Ethan another question about the $5,000 or the lunch at the seafood restaurant. It was not that I had forgotten, and it was certainly not that I was afraid. I just started to feel that I needed to step back a little, to see the whole picture. Working in finance, I understood a very simple principle. If you only look at a single, isolated number, you might think it is a mistake. But when you place it within the entire balance sheet, you realize it is a sign of a system that is off kilter. I sat in the living room on a quiet evening, looking at the condo we had lived in for 3 years, and a strange feeling washed over me. I had chosen this cream-colored sofa, and I had chosen the light gray curtains. The 4-seater oak dining table next to the kitchen was something I had decided on after visiting 3 different stores because I wanted something both durable and easy to clean. Every corner of this home had been arranged by my hand. Yet now, when I thought about the deed having both our names on it, a pang of regret shot through me. When we first married, my mother had pulled me aside in the kitchen, and while trimming vegetables, she had warned me. The idea of marital property is fine, but what can be kept clear, should be kept clear. These days, loving each other is one thing, but black and white on paper is another. At the time, I had laughed. Mom, you worry too much. Ethan isn't that kind of person. My mother heard me, sighed, and said no more. Looking back now, I realize that young women often trust their feelings more than the warnings of those who have gone before them. You think that if you live decently, others will be decent in return. But life does not operate on a fair, one-for-one basis like an equation. In 3 years as a daughter-in-law, I had never neglected his family. On weekends when I was free, I would buy some fruit, a carton of milk, or sometimes a chicken to make soup. For holidays and anniversaries, I never let anyone have to remind me. On months when I received a good bonus, I would proactively give my in-laws a little extra spending money. I did not see it as a heavy obligation. To me, once you are married, both sides are family. But strangely, the longer I lived with them, the more I realized that in my mother-in-law's eyes, the word family seemed to have many layers. Diane was very smooth-tongued. In front of neighbors and relatives, she always said the nicest things. My Eleanor is so talented, she has a good position at work but still knows how to manage the house. Or, it is not easy to find a daughter-in-law who knows how to work and how to live these days. Anyone who heard her would think I was as cherished as her own daughter. Many people even told me how fortunate I was. I too once thought that adults can be a bit difficult at times, but as long as they cared for me deep down, it was fine. But as soon as the door closed, her tone would change. Once, I bought a rather expensive box of gourmet chocolates to give to a corporate partner and bought an extra one to bring to my in-laws. Diane picked it up, examined it, and then chuckled. Well, a woman who makes her own money certainly spends it freely. But let me tell you, not everything in life can be measured in money, dear. I smiled faintly. Yes, I know, Mom. She placed the box down, her voice still as sweet as tea. I am just afraid that someone in finance like you gets used to counting every penny and becomes cold over time. A woman's worth is in her character, in the warmth she brings to the home. If you were to repeat that statement to an outsider, it might not sound like much. But living under the same roof, everyone understands that some words, even without a sharp edge, can still cut deep. It is like someone tapping the rim of a bowl with a chopstick, not loud, not disruptive, but enough to make you feel uneasy for a long time. Richard, my father-in-law, was a different type. He spoke less than Diane, preferring to sit in his wicker chair on the balcony, drinking tea, watching the news, and occasionally commenting on life with a slow, experienced-sounding drawl. These days, he would often say, a man must have a mind for business, and a woman must know how to nurture the home. Any household where the roles are confused will fall into chaos. On the surface, it sounded very principled. But being around him for a while, I noticed he had a strange anxiety whenever an unknown number called. Once, we were in the middle of dinner, and as soon as the landline rang, he startled and slammed his bowl down. Diane glanced over, faster than her husband, and quickly picked up the phone, saying evasively, "He is not here right now. I will let him know you called." Then she turned back to the table with a breezy smile, "Just an old friend of your father's, always calling about trivial things." The first couple of times, I did not pay it much mind, but it happened several more times. Sometimes it was a call in the early evening, sometimes around noon. Each time, the atmosphere in the house would quickly tense up, only to be covered over by a slightly forced layer of normality. Ethan never spoke to me directly about his father's affairs. Whenever I asked casually, "Is something going on with Dad lately?" he would always give a smooth reply. "No, he is just getting old. Worries about little things." I believed him. Or more accurately, I chose to believe him. Because who does not want to keep their married life looking neat and tidy? Work was tiring enough, no one wants to come home and stir everything up unless it is absolutely necessary. Many times, I even told myself the same thing the older generation always says, let it go. In a family, if you can overlook something, you should. Digging too deep is not always for the best. Sitting here and remembering now, I see that I had forgiven too many things, right from when they were very small. Ethan was the same. In the past, whenever his mother made a passive-aggressive comment about me being headstrong because I earned money, he would just laugh it off. "Mom just says that, but she is very fond of you." Or, "That is just how older people are. They say things, but they do not mean them." At the time, I thought my husband was being diplomatic, standing in the middle to keep the peace. But now, every time I recall it, I only see that he was very good at one thing, turning everything that made me uncomfortable into a small matter, so that in the end, the one who always had to adjust her own feelings was me. That Friday afternoon, as I was folding the last of the clean towels I had just brought in from the balcony, Ethan emerged from the bedroom with the small gray carry-on he always used for short business trips. "I have a team-building event with the branch office tomorrow, just overnight," he said, his eyes on his phone. "We are probably leaving early." I looked up. "Where?" "Just outside the city, near the Berkshires somewhere," he replied naturally. "HR finalized it last week." I nodded, my hands still smoothing the edge of a towel. This time, I did not ask who he was going with, when he would be back, or what he was packing. I just looked at the small suitcase by the door and felt something inside me shift very slowly. Because after everything that had just happened, I understood one thing. When a person is used to hiding things, an overnight trip is never just an overnight trip. The next morning, Ethan woke up earlier than usual. It was just after 6, and he was already opening the closet, choosing a white dress shirt and dark gray trousers, even carefully ironing the cuffs in front of the mirror. The familiar scent of his cologne wafted through the bedroom. The scent that once made me feel comfortable now made my mind as taut as a stretched wire. I stood in the kitchen making a pot of oatmeal, my voice still sounding normal as I asked, "Are you eating breakfast at home or on the way?" Ethan adjusted the watch on his wrist and replied, "I will just grab something quick. I have to leave early to meet up with the group." I ladled the oatmeal into a bowl and placed it on the table. "So you will probably be back tomorrow afternoon, then?" "Yeah, if we finish early, I will be back in the evening." He pulled out a chair and sat down, scrolling through his phone as he ate. His conversation throughout breakfast was smooth, with no signs of anything unusual, other than the fact that he was dressed far more meticulously than necessary for an overnight team-building event. It was not as if I had never been on such trips with my company. People usually wear comfortable shoes, a jacket for activities, and at most, a backpack. But Ethan this morning looked as polished as if he were about to meet a VIP client. At 10 minutes to 7, he picked up his suitcase and headed for the door. Before leaving, he turned back and said, "Be sure to get some sleep, do not work too late." I stood by the shoe rack and nodded slightly. "Drive safe." The door closed, and the sound of his footsteps faded down the hallway. I stood still for a moment, my eyes fixed on the dark brown wooden door in front of me. The entire apartment suddenly fell silent, leaving only the low hum of the refrigerator and the sound of a light breeze rustling the edge of the curtains on the balcony. I knew that if this were me a few months ago, I would have pushed aside all these chaotic thoughts and told myself, he is away for work, do not be childish. But perhaps after the fake gift, the missing $5,000, the lunch at the seafood restaurant while he was in meetings, I was no longer naive enough to fool myself like that. I went into the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and picked up my phone. A while back, on a trip to Vermont, we had both enabled location sharing for each other to make it easier to connect if we got separated from our group. We had not used it much since, but I remembered I had never turned it off. I opened the app. The screen loaded for a few seconds and then displayed the familiar map of Boston. A small blue dot appeared. My heart beat a little faster. I stared intently at the screen. The blue dot was moving away from the Brookline area, but not in the direction of the Berkshires as Ethan had said. It was heading straight toward downtown, then looped over a bridge, gradually approaching a high-end urban development on the city's east side. I still tried to reassure myself. Maybe the company changed the location at the last minute. Maybe he was picking up a colleague. Maybe I was overthinking it. When a woman is suspicious, she sees question marks everywhere. I knew that. But knowing was one thing, being able to let it go without verification was another. I gave myself almost no time to think further. I grabbed my handbag from the chair and quickly changed into a light jacket. I locked the door, went downstairs, and hailed a cab. The car moved through the still empty streets of the weekend morning. The Boston sky was a hazy, pale gray, the sun not yet fully risen, a chill clinging to the trees along the road. I sat in the back seat, my eyes glued to my phone screen. Every time the blue dot turned, my heart constricted a little. The driver asked, "You heading over to the seaport, ma'am?" I replied vaguely, "Yes, just follow this route, please." As the car crossed the bridge, the city unfolded into a different landscape, sparser, newer. Rows of glass-fronted buildings and high-end condominium towers stretched out under the pale sky. The blue dot on my screen had stopped at a fixed point in a development I knew very well. It had been heavily advertised recently, a luxury apartment complex, the kind of project where each unit costs no less than a few $1,000,000. I asked the driver to stop a short distance away and walked the rest of the way. From a distance, I could see Ethan's car parked near the guest entrance. I hid behind a large, stone-clad pillar, my palms cold and clammy. The driver's side door opened, and Ethan stepped out, his white shirt crisp, his hair neatly styled, looking every bit like a man on his way to sign a contract. I had not even had a chance to breathe when the passenger door opened. The person who stepped out was not a strange woman, as my worst fears over the past few days had conjured, but my mother-in-law, Diane. She was wearing a plum-colored dress with a light wool coat, carrying a brand-new handbag, and wearing low-heeled shoes. Her face was lit up the kind of glow a person has when they are approaching something they desperately want. Ethan even circled around to take his mother's arm, leaning in to say something that made her laugh. It was a soft yet gleeful laugh, like someone who had just won a prize. I stood there, frozen. Every scenario I had imagined about an affair, about a man sneaking off to meet someone behind his wife's back, instantly shifted. A different feeling crept up from my stomach to my chest, colder, more sinister, and much harder to name. The mother and son walked side by side into the lobby of the model unit sales gallery. Inside, warm yellow lights shone brightly. Staff in uniforms stood in a line to welcome guests. On the wall, a large, glittering project model promised a life of luxury. I pulled my face mask up higher and silently followed, keeping a safe distance. Diane looked around, her voice filled with delight. "My goodness, this is how the wealthy live. Just stepping inside feels refreshing." Ethan smiled politely at the young sales consultant who was leading the way. "My mother prefers open spaces. I brought her by today, just to have a look." Hearing that, I almost laughed a bitter laugh. The man who just this morning had claimed to be going on a team-building trip to the Berkshires was now standing in a high-end real estate development, speaking gently to his mother as if this were a completely innocent, dutiful outing. The consultant invited them to the model apartment on an upper floor. I did not dare to follow too closely, instead lingering near a large potted plant in the lounge area, pretending to look at a brochure on a table. From that position, I could still watch their figures disappear around a bend in the hallway. My heart at that moment was no longer a fire of anger flaring up. It was more like a pot of water on a stove not boiling over, but simmering, growing hotter with each passing moment. I knew the matter I was facing was probably not small, and the intuition of someone who lives by numbers told me that what Ethan and his mother were hiding was not just a fancy meal or a cheap gift meant to impress. It was about money, and very likely, it was directly related to my life. I clutched my bag tighter, lifting my head to look toward the hallway where they had just disappeared. The chill inside me had now spread to my fingertips. I no longer felt like a curious wife trailing her husband. I felt like I was standing before the door to a truth that, once opened, would ensure that nothing in this marriage would ever be the same again. I stood hidden behind a tall money tree in the lounge, a project brochure held loosely in my hand to avoid suspicion. The scent of lemongrass essential oil filled the hall, the air conditioning was cool, and wordless piano music flowed from the ceiling speakers. Everything here was designed to make people feel as if they were touching a different kind of life, clean, luxurious, desirable. I looked up toward the carpeted hallway leading to the model units. The sound of footsteps ahead was faint. I did not dare to follow too closely, just a few paces behind, enough to duck into a corner when they stopped. Near the entrance to the largest model unit, I heard Diane's voice clearly. Her voice was already somewhat high-pitched, and when she was happy, it was even more distinct. Oh my, now this is a place worth living in. To wake up and see that much sky, what more could you want? I leaned to peer through a gap between two decorative panels. Inside was a vast, open space with floor-to-ceiling windows and a matte finish hardwood floor. A beige sofa was neatly arranged next to a marble-veined coffee table. Ethan stood beside his mother, hands in his pockets, nodding just so, like someone who had seen this place many times before. The sales consultant smiled brightly. Yes, this is our 3-bedroom model, nearly 2,000 square feet, perfect for a multi-generational family. The living room flows into the kitchen, and the master suite inside is the most spacious. The moment Diane heard that, she walked straight toward the back, her eyes shining. She did a lap, touching the cabinet doors, lightly stroking the white stone kitchen countertop, then stood at the entrance of the master bedroom and turned to her son. This room has to be for your father and me, who else? The windows are huge, and the bathroom is right inside. It is perfect. I listened, my body stiffening. Ethan did not hesitate. He smiled, his voice as gentle as if indulging a perfectly reasonable request. Yes, that is what I was thinking. This room would be perfect for you and Dad. Diane stepped deeper inside, looking around with the eyes of someone admiring something that was almost hers. She pointed to the wall behind the headboard. A king-sized oak bed would fit perfectly there. And over there, a display cabinet for my handbags. My leather bags in the old house are getting musty, it is so depressing. Then she turned toward the room's small balcony. Richard likes to sit and drink his tea while watching the street. A small round table there would be perfect. Yes, that would be nice. I stood outside, my fingers crushing the brochure. So, in my mother-in-law's vision of the future, their place was already clearly defined, spacious, beautiful, dignified. Only I had no idea where I was meant to fit. The answer came moments later. The consultant opened the door to a smaller bedroom. As she was introducing the square footage, Diane's eyes swept over it and she said immediately, "This room would be fine for Ethan and his wife. They are young, they do not need much space. They are at work all day, a place to rest their heads at night is enough." Ethan just nodded, so naturally it made my heart clench. Yes. We are fine with anything, as long as you and Dad are comfortable. That phrase, "we are fine with anything," might sound dutiful and considerate on its own. But in that context, amidst all the clear-headed calculations and arrangements, I felt like nothing more than an optional piece of furniture, to be pushed into any corner that was convenient. I was his wife, the person whose name was on our current home, the person who had carried the bulk of our family's expenses for years. Yet in his mouth, the question of where I would live in this new apartment was simply anything will be fine. People say that what is spoken offhandedly is the truth, and that is probably right, because in those moments, they are not acting. The sales consultant continued her cheerful pitch. If your family wishes, we can also offer a complete furnishing package. The smaller room could be designed as a home office or a nursery for later. Diane chuckled and glanced at her son. A baby can wait. The priority is the house. We need a proper house. Living in that tiny old place, there is nowhere for guests to sit. It looks so cramped. The tiny old place was our current home. Standing behind the partition, my lips went dry. So the place where I had poured my money, my energy, and the years of my youth to make it a home was, in their eyes, just tiny and cramped. A temporary stop that needed to be replaced by something grander, shinier, more fitting of their image. They moved to the kitchen. Diane looked down at the walnut-colored cabinets and said dreamily, that wall would be perfect for a grand fireplace with a custom mantelpiece for our family photos. And a wine cabinet on the side, for when we have guests. Ethan, ever the accommodating son, replied, I told you, Mom, this place is perfect for you and Dad. I suddenly understood something. This was not their first time here. The way Ethan stood, a little too casually, the way he let his mother naturally envision her belongings, the way he chimed in at just the right moments, it all showed that this conversation had been rehearsed. Not a spontaneous visit just to look. Just then, the consultant received a call and excused herself to get a price list and payment plan. The door closed, leaving only the quiet hum of the air conditioning in the model unit. It was in that silence that the truest words were spoken. Diane lowered her voice, but I could still hear her clearly. You have to handle the paperwork carefully. Do not let Eleanor find out too soon. My heart felt like it was being squeezed. Ethan replied, his voice lower, deeper. Do not worry, Mom. I have it all planned. Diane clicked her tongue. If she finds out beforehand, it will just be a mess. Let her carry the weight for a few years first. After everything is settled, we will figure it out. Women. A few sweet words, a little coaxing, and they will come around. I could no longer hear the blood rushing in my ears. A chill ran from the back of my neck down my spine. If before I had felt hurt at being relegated to a small room, I now understood that pain was nothing compared to those words. Carry the weight. They were not just planning to live in a new apartment, they were planning for the risk, and they were planning for the person who would bear that risk. And that person was me. I stood behind the partition, looking at my own hands, which had turned white from clenching too hard. My mouth tasted bitter, and a single thought repeated in my head like a hammer. Something very big was being hidden, very big, and it was directly tied to my name. A few minutes later, Ethan and his mother left the model unit to have lunch with the consultant downstairs. I ducked into a corner, waited for them to be completely gone, and then stepped out. The air in the apartment still held the smell of new wood and a faint trace of Diane's perfume. It was a beautiful, polished, bright space. But to me, at that moment, it was like a stage after the curtain had fallen, revealing all the ropes and steel frames behind the scenes. I walked slowly through the living room, back into the master bedroom, my eyes quickly scanning every part of the model unit. I do not know if it was intuition or professional habit, but I had a feeling that someone like Ethan would not come here empty-handed. For important matters involving money and documents, he always had a habit of keeping things close, or hiding them in a place he thought was safe. Just then, my eyes landed on a recessed nook next to the unfinished closet in the master bedroom. There, half hidden, was a small, gray mini safe. I stood frozen for a beat, then another. I knew I could not leave just yet. I stood before the mini safe, the sound of my own heart pounding in my chest. The model apartment was spacious, quiet, and immaculate. But in my eyes, everything had turned as cold as an uninhabited room. Outside, the late morning sun cast long, beautiful streaks of light across the hardwood floor, through the large windows, so beautiful, it made my eyes sting. I took a deep breath and stepped closer. The safe was recessed into the wall next to the closet space, a small, dark gray model with a digital keypad and a mechanical handle. It was not anything extraordinary, but it was discreet enough to store documents one would not want anyone to touch. I glanced around. The hallway outside was silent, with only the distant click of heels and the faint murmur of a sales agent from a lower floor. I knew I did not have much time. My fingers rested on the cool keypad. In my mind, I pictured the numbers Ethan often used for things he considered important. Men in banking often have that habit. They think they are being careful, but they just cycle through a few familiar dates. I tried the year he was promoted to his current position. Incorrect. I tried Diane's birth month and year combined with the last 2 digits of Ethan's license plate. A soft click echoed. I startled, holding my breath, my fingers instantly going cold. I stood still for a few seconds, making sure I had not misheard. Then I slowly turned the handle. The safe door swung open. Inside, there was no gold, no cash, none of the things one might imagine. There was only a moderately thick file folder with a blue cover, the edges of the paper smoothed with the care of someone accustomed to handling documents. I pulled it out and placed it on the nearby vanity table. The tips of my fingers began to tremble, so slightly that I could feel it myself. As I opened the first page, the bold words "Apartment Purchase and Sale Agreement" jumped out at me. The project name was at the top, confirming it was this very development. I flipped down to the property information section. A unit of nearly 2,000 square feet, 3 bedrooms. The exact unit my mother-in-law had just been mentally furnishing, as if it were already hers. The sales price, right in the middle of the page, made my eyelids twitch. $3,500,000. $3.5 million. I read it again, thinking I had miscounted the zeros. No mistake. $3.5 million, not including furnishings, management fees, and a host of other small costs that would add up to a fortune. Given Ethan's real income, no matter how good it was, this was not the kind of asset he could just walk in and buy like a new car. I flipped to the payment schedule right behind the contract. The first installment of over $700,000 had already been paid. The subsequent payments followed like a steep staircase, one that I knew, with just a glance, could break anyone who took a misstep not for a few months, but for a lifetime. My throat went dry. I flipped through a few more pages, my worst premonitions crawling up my spine. Behind the contract was a bank loan application. The loan amount was for $2,800,000. A long-term loan with a variable interest rate after the initial period. It was the kind of file that a finance professional like me could see at a glance was a ticking time bomb. One wrong move and both the property and the person on the deed could be repossessed. My palms grew clammy. But all of that was not the heaviest blow. The real blow was on the next page. I turned to the section for the guarantor and co-signer. My eyes had barely scanned the first 3 lines when I felt as if a hammer had struck my chest. My name, Eleanor, was there, not a coincidence, not a casual mention, but my full name, social security number, address, and legal position tied to this loan. Right below it was a signature identical to my own. I collapsed onto the chair. If anyone had walked by then, they would have thought all the blood had been drained from my body. My ears rang, and my vision momentarily went black. I stared at that familiar signature. The loop on the E, the downward stroke on the final R. It was my signature. So perfect that if it were in a stack of documents at my office, I myself would have approved it. But I knew with absolute certainty that I had never signed a loan application to buy this condo. A horrifying feeling crept up my spine. This was no longer about petty lies, no longer about a lunch or a fake gift. This was my name, my liability, my life, being placed in the middle of a colossal debt without my knowledge. I forced myself to breathe evenly and quickly flipped through the remaining pages. A photocopy of my ID, various information verification forms, an income statement, an appraisal report. Everything was prepared so completely, so smoothly, so professionally that the more I looked, the colder I felt. The person who did this was not just reckless, they were calculating. They knew exactly what was needed to turn an unsuspecting person into a legally bound party. And then, like a delayed slap, a memory flashed in my mind. Over a month ago, during my company's intense quarterly closing period, I had come home late, my head throbbing. Ethan was waiting at the dining table with a thick stack of papers, explaining that his bank was restructuring its insurance packages and that mid-level managers like him were required to complete family information verification forms. He had already turned to each page, marking the signature lines with a pen, and urged me, "Can you sign these quickly for me? I have to submit them first thing in the morning. It is all just internal paperwork." I remember being so tired, sipping half a glass of warm water while signing wherever his finger pointed. Ethan stood beside me, flipping the pages quickly, his voice even. "Just this page, and one more here to complete the set." I had signed without reading carefully. Only because it was my husband. Only because I thought that between a husband and wife, some things did not require suspicion. Now, sitting in this strange model apartment, holding a file with my name on it, my mind felt like it was being twisted. A person as careful as me, who would track down the source of a single-digit discrepancy, had ultimately been deceived by the one thing she thought was safest: trust in her marriage. I put the file down, pressing my hands flat on the edge of the table to stop them from shaking. There was pain, there was humiliation, but above all, there was a very real fear. $2,800,000. A liability large enough to crush anyone who was forced to bear it. Outside the window, the sun was still bright. In the room, the smell of new wood was still faint and pleasant. Everything was clean, luxurious, and perfect, like an advertisement for an upscale lifestyle. Only I knew then that beneath that beautiful veneer was a trap, and the person who had been led to its edge from the very beginning was me. I do not remember how I left that condo development. I only remember that when I pressed the elevator button, my fingers were so cold they kept slipping on the touch screen. In my handbag, my phone was still warm from taking nearly 20 consecutive photos of the file. I had captured all the most important pages. The condo's value, the payment schedule, the $2.8 million loan, and the section with my name and the signature that was a perfect forgery of my own. As I reached the lobby, I did not dare to linger. I walked straight through the glass doors, taking a breath of the outside air, but my chest still felt heavy, as if a stone were pressing down on it. Life is truly ironic. People view luxury homes with excitement, but I walked out of a $3.5 million condo feeling as if I had just been thrown out of my own marriage. I hailed a cab and had it drive around for a while before stopping at a small coffee shop tucked away on a quiet street near the river. The shop was nearly empty, with just a few dark wooden tables and chairs, a slow-turning ceiling fan, and the fragrant but bitter smell of roasted coffee. I chose a corner table, leaned my back against the wall, and opened my phone to look at the photos one more time. The more I looked, the more my mind cleared in a very painful way. This was no longer about Ethan telling a white lie or protecting his male pride. He had calculated this. It was prepared, it had a timeline, and in this entire plan, I was not his wife. I was his legal backing, the clean name he and his family could use as leverage. When I reached the photo of my signature, my eyes stung. I turned off the screen, lowered my head, and pressed my forehead into my hands. Only then did the tears come. I did not sob loudly. I just let them fall in silence, hot and suffocating. I was not mourning a beautiful marriage, because I now knew it was never as beautiful as I had thought. I was crying because I had been deceived at my weakest point, my trust. The feeling that the person who had lain beside me for 3 years, shared meals with me, slept in the same bed, called me his wife, could still flip through pages, place a pen in my hand, and set a trap this large it hurt more than being slapped across the face. After crying for a few minutes, I wiped my tears and called my mother. Sarah picked up almost instantly. "Hello? Eleanor, is that you?" Just hearing her voice made my throat tighten. I tried to speak, but the words would not come out whole. My mother was silent for a few seconds, then her voice softened. "What happened? Tell me." So, I told her. I told her everything, from the anniversary night, the fake necklace, the missing $5,000, the lunch receipt, the fake team-building trip, to the model condo that morning, and the file in the safe. I did not leave out a single detail, recounting it all as if I were removing stones, one by one, from my chest. At times my voice broke, at times I had to pause to breathe. My mother just listened. She did not interrupt, did not cry out, did not scold me for being foolish. She just listened. When I finished, there was a brief silence on the line, and then she asked slowly, "Did you get pictures of the documents?" "I did, Mom. I got them all." "Did you save them somewhere else? Do not just keep them on your phone." I looked up. That was my mother. A woman who had spent her whole life in a small town, but when it mattered, her mind was as clear as well water in winter. I quickly opened my laptop, emailed all the photos to my personal account, and uploaded them to a password-protected cloud drive. When I was done, I replied, "They are saved." My mother continued, her voice even. "Now, you listen to me. 1. You do not let on that you know. 2. You do not cause a scene right now. And 3. From this moment on, you have to be one step ahead of him." I bit my lip. "But what if they do something else, Mom?" She sighed softly. "If you want to catch a snake, you do not startle it by stomping in the grass. The forged signature can be proven. What I am more worried about is that $700,000 down payment. Where did it come from? That kind of money did not just appear out of Ethan's salary. There must be other debts or a high-interest loan behind it. If you want to get out of this clean, you have to find the root." I sat up straight. Each of my mother's words was like a splash of cold water, pulling me out of my daze. She was right. If I stormed home now and confronted him, Ethan would deny it, he would cover his tracks, he would play the part of a husband who made a foolish mistake. And I, without enough proof, might end up looking like a hysterical, paranoid wife. My mother added, "If you still need to cry, then cry it all out. But when you are done, you use your head. In this life, you often lose not because you are foolish, but because you still have feelings. And the other person? They only have calculations. I gave a dry, tear-stained laugh. Those words were as bitter as they were true. I took a sip of the now cool water, my throat feeling a little less raw. That afternoon, I returned home as if nothing had happened. On the way, I stopped at a small electronics store and bought a mini voice recorder and a GPS tracker for the car. The salesman enthusiastically explained their features, but I was only half listening. My mind had already shifted into a different mode, no longer pain, but calculation. That evening, just as I had predicted, Ethan played the part of the gentle husband. He came home earlier than usual, carrying a bag of oranges and a bottle of vitamins for my mother. The moment he walked in, he said, "I was thinking, we should start planning our finances better. My bank is offering a priority credit card for management-level employees. It has a high limit, which is convenient for entertaining clients and proving financial capacity. It just needs a family member to co-sign." I was ladling soup into a bowl. Hearing that, a chill ran down my spine. So, the fish was biting at the exact bait my mother had predicted. Ethan sat down at the table, his voice as smooth as velvet. "Will you sign for me, Ellie? We are a team, after all." I put the bowl down and looked up at my husband. A few days ago, the pain might have made my hands tremble. But at that moment, I saw not my husband, but someone testing to see if an old trap still worked. I replied slowly, "I do not think I will be signing anything related to money this month." Ethan froze. "Why not?" I added another spoonful of butternut squash soup to my bowl, my voice casual. "A colleague at work dragged me to see her astrologer yesterday. She said my charts are terrible for finances this month. Anything I sign will lead to bankruptcy. It sounds superstitious, I know, but better safe than sorry." Ethan's eyes darkened for a split second, but he recovered his composure almost instantly, even managing a laugh. "Since when did you start believing in that stuff?" I smiled back faintly. Believe it or not, I still think it never hurts to be careful. The dinner that evening proceeded as normal. So normal that an outsider looking in would never have guessed that a chasm had just opened up between the two of us. I am sure you understand by now that some situations, the more you think about them, the angrier you get, but the angrier you get, the slower you must move. If you were in my position, would you have chosen to stay silent and gather evidence, or to confront him immediately and demand the truth? Sometimes, a moment of restraint is when fate begins to turn, and a person's true nature is revealed more clearly than ever. The next morning, I woke up nearly half an hour before Ethan. He was still asleep, one arm draped over the blanket, his face in the dim morning light looking as peaceful as it did on any other day. I lay on my side, watching him for a few seconds, a strange numbness in my heart. It is true, when you do not know the truth, you can still feel love, still feel pity. But once you have seen what is behind the curtain, all the beauty on the surface becomes meaningless. I got out of bed quietly, changed for work, and went down to the parking garage earlier than usual. I had installed the GPS tracker the night before, and the mini voice recorder was now discreetly attached under the driver's seat. The device was as small as 2 fingers, matte black, and tucked into a corner where it was nearly invisible. As I bent down to check it one last time, my palms were cold. The feeling was strange, a mix of humiliation, bitterness, and the sense that I was personally tearing away the last layer of cloth covering my own eyes. The entire day, I went to the office, attended meetings, signed documents, and reconciled spreadsheets as if nothing had happened. A finance professional is used to living by deadlines. No matter how much pain you are in, you are not allowed to lose your composure. My colleague, Sarah, who sat at the next desk, even laughed and said, "You look so tense lately. That is what a big project does to you." I smiled back. Tense, but if I am not, I am finished. She had no idea that the thing making me tense was not the project, but the pit opening up right under my feet. Late that afternoon, after I was sure Ethan had driven a good distance, I opened the app to connect to the recorder. An audio file appeared, over 40 minutes long. I put in my earbuds, sat quietly in my small office, closed the blinds, and pressed play. At first, it was just the sound of the engine, a car door closing, horns on the street, occasionally interrupted by a radio ad for cough medicine that was giving me a headache. I fast-forwarded through the first few minutes until I heard Ethan clear his throat and the sound of a call connecting through the car's speakers. Diane's voice came through on the other end. "So, what happened?" Ethan spoke immediately, his tone no longer the soft one he used at home, but much brusquer. "I told you, I am working on it, but Eleanor suddenly got difficult and would not sign." I sat frozen. Even though I had expected to hear something ugly, hearing it in my husband's familiar voice still made my chest ache. Diane asked, "Does she suspect something?" Ethan gave a cynical laugh, a laugh I had never heard when he spoke to me. What could she suspect? Eleanor is by the book, but she is also gullible. A few sweet words about doing it for the family, and she will come around. I squeezed my headphones so tightly my ears hurt. Ethan continued, his voice slow, as if analyzing a simple case. I just need her to sign for one more card. Once the card comes, I will pull out a chunk of the limit and give it to you for the furniture deposit. After that is settled, we will figure out the rest. It is too much pressure with everything coming from one source right now. Diane clicked her tongue. Well, you need to be smart about it. Do not let her turn the tables on you. Ethan uttered a sentence that made my hand tremble. Do not worry, Mom. She is my wife, not a stranger. She is not that hard to handle. Hearing that, I took off my headphones and set them on the desk, my hands clenched together until they were white. The office was silent. Outside the glass wall, employees from other departments were walking by, laughing, talking, rushing to finalize end-of-day numbers. The city was functioning normally. It was only inside me that something had just snapped in two. So, this was the truth. It was not that Ethan had made a mistake, not that he had been cornered and acted recklessly. And it certainly was not that, deep down, he still saw me as someone to rely on. In his eyes, I was just gullible, a name he could sign for, a convenient person in the household to be manipulated. All the phrases like I love you, I see how hard you work, we are a team in the end, they were just fig leaves covering a pot of rice that had long been burnt. I replayed the recording one more time, listening more slowly, writing down the key phrases verbatim in a notebook. My professional habits helped me recover quickly from the shock. I noted the time, date, and content, cross-referencing each point with my previous evidence. The fake gift, the missing $5,000, the restaurant receipt, the trip to see the condo, the file in the safe, my mother-in-law's instruction to let me carry the weight, and now, this phone call. It was all forming a very clear circle. Around 6 in the evening, I left the office as usual. On the way home, traffic thickened, red lights stretching out in a long line. I sat in the back of a cab, watching people weave through the streets, my heart strangely calm. Not because the pain was gone, but because I was in so much pain there was nothing left to be tumultuous about. When I got home, Ethan was already there. He was standing in the kitchen with his sleeves rolled up, washing grapes. When he saw me, he turned and smiled. I got home early today. I was thinking of taking you out to dinner so you would not have to cook. I looked at my husband, then at the bunch of purple grapes, water running through his fingers. If this had been before, that image would have softened my heart. But now, I just found it laughable. The man who, this morning, had told his mother I was gullible, was now standing here playing the part of a decent husband. It is true, the scariest people in the world are not the openly wicked, but those who are both calculating and exceptionally good actors. I took off my shoes and set my bag down. Let us not go out. I am a little tired. Ethan glanced at me, perhaps to gauge my mood, then nodded quickly. Okay. Then I will make you a bowl of soup. I did not reply, just walked silently into the bedroom to change. As the door closed behind me, I leaned against the closet for a moment, and shut my eyes tightly. From that day on, I no longer asked myself if this marriage could be saved. Because you can forgive a mistake, a moment of weakness, even a period of going astray. But it is very difficult to continue living with someone who sees your trust as a tool. And I knew that the last soft part of me that was reserved for Ethan had died while listening to that recording in my office that afternoon. That evening, after Ethan brought me a bowl of soup, I ate calmly, as if I had not heard the words Eleanor is gullible echo in my ears just hours before. Perhaps when a woman is in too much pain, she becomes calmer than usual. I no longer wanted to argue, nor did I want to ask another question. The more I saw my husband's gentle demeanor, the more I understood that this man was no longer worth expending my emotions on. After eating, I went to my room, closed the door, and called my mother. I recounted the conversation between Ethan and Diane verbatim. On the other end, my mother was silent for a moment, then said slowly, "So that is clear. Now the only thing missing is the source of that $700,000 down payment." I asked, "What is your plan, Mom?" She gave a dry laugh, the kind of laugh that comes from experience light yet cold. A person who is desperate for money will run toward the smell of it. If you want to know how deep their hole is, just toss them a piece of bait. The next morning, my mother called me, right when Ethan was sitting at the table eating breakfast. I intentionally put the call on speaker and walked slowly with my bowl of oatmeal. My mother's voice on the line sounded shaky, but I knew it was a deliberate tremor, to sound like someone both overjoyed and worried. "Eleanor, I have some news." The plot of land your grandparents owned back home, the town is surveying it for a new development. They are saying our family could get around $800,000 in compensation. Before I could even respond, the spoon in Ethan's hand froze midair, a tiny clink against the bowl. He shot his head up to look at me, his eyes wide for just a second before he quickly looked down again. But that was enough for me to see greed peeking out from behind his mask of composure. I kept my voice normal. Really? Are you sure, Mom? My mother replied, it is not final yet, but a friend who works for the town said it is very likely. I am old, I would not know what to do with that much money anyway. I was thinking I would give you two a chunk of it to get a bigger place, so you are not so cramped. I just mumbled a few vague acknowledgments and hung up. The kitchen was silent for a few seconds. Outside the window, the morning sun cast a pale yellow light on the pot of chives I was growing on the sill. Ethan finished his last spoonful of oatmeal, but his eyes were no longer on the bowl. That man was truly a good actor, but money is often a more powerful test than morality. He put his spoon down and asked casually, where is your grandparents' land again? I added more oatmeal to my bowl. Near Worcester. It is just farmland. Is it big? It is decent sized. He nodded, trying to appear nonchalant, but his tone was different. Property values are really something these days. If your mom gets that, it would be a big help. I did not reply, just continued eating. Sometimes, silence can make a person more anxious than an argument. Sure enough, from that afternoon, Ethan's behavior changed noticeably. He proactively texted to ask if I was done with work. In the evening, he came home with a bag of expensive imported fruit, saying, this is for your mom. The next day at dinner, he cleared the table and even washed the soup pot himself. I watched my husband's back at the sink and felt a bitter taste in my mouth. It was not that he had never helped in our 3 years of marriage, but this kind of sudden, cloyingly sweet attentiveness looked exactly like someone trying to reel in a net. On Tuesday night, Ethan sat down next to me on the sofa, his voice soft. I have been thinking, if your mom really gets that money, we should plan for the long term. This place is getting small, and it is hard for a young couple to grow if we are always cramped. I kept my eyes on the television. I have not thought about it. Ethan smiled, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. I am only saying this because I am worried about our future. When an opportunity comes, you should take it. Letting money sit idle is often a waste. I shifted my shoulder slightly and stood up to get some water. It is my mom's money. What she does with it is her decision. Ethan watched me, his eyes darkening slightly, but he maintained his gentle tone. Of course, I know that. But as her children, we should offer advice so she does not lose out. It was not just Ethan who changed. On Wednesday, Diane also called me, her voice as sweet as sugar. Eleanor, I have noticed you are looking thin lately. Make sure you take care of yourself at work, do not just bury yourself in it. Oh, when you have a free moment, let me know and I'll send over some of that expensive collagen supplement you were reading about. I stood in the hallway at work, watching people walk by, and almost laughed out loud. My mother-in-law had never before cared what supplements I was taking. I knew very well what she really cared about. I replied with just enough politeness. Thank you, Mom. Diane clicked her tongue. This family is so blessed, you know. Ever since you joined us, I feel like our fortunes have improved. A good daughter-in-law really does bring good luck. I listened, my tongue tasting bitter. So, when they caught the scent of $800,000, I had been upgraded from a money-minded, cold daughter-in-law to a bearer of good luck that quickly. But the most revealing blow came from another phone call, one that Ethan had no idea I was recording. On Thursday afternoon, I opened the new audio file from the device under his car seat. After a few minutes of driving sounds and Ethan muttering curses about the traffic, Richard's voice came through the speaker, raspy and more urgent than usual. Whatever you are going to do, do it fast. They are pushing me. Ethan lowered his voice. I am working on it. I have a source. Richard almost whispered a shout. What source? Ethan replied, his voice tense but unable to hide his impatience. My mother-in-law. Her land is about to be bought out for nearly $800,000. The other end of the line went silent for a few seconds, then Richard exhaled sharply. Then you have to grab it. We are already struggling with that $700,000 down payment. Those guys keep texting. My heart nearly jumps out of my chest every time the phone rings. I sat frozen at my desk. $700,000. The exact figure my mother had suspected. Ethan continued, I know. If we can just get that money first, we can pay off the high-interest loan. Then we can figure out the condo. If we let this drag on, we are all finished. Richard lowered his voice, but every word was as clear as a nail being hammered in. You have to get that money, no matter what. Otherwise, this whole family is done for. I slowly took off my headphones. On my desk was a cup of jasmine tea a colleague had just made for me. The steam had long since vanished. I looked at the pale golden liquid and felt a deep chill. So, it was all clear. The over $700,000 for the down payment was not from savings, nor was it from any clean investment. It was a debt burning under my in-laws' feet, and they were looking at my mother's fake $800,000 as their lifeline. No, more accurately, as the lifeline for their own greed. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a few seconds. At this point, all the pieces had nearly fallen into place. All that was left was to choose the right moment to lay them out. And I knew my mother was waiting for that exact moment. Because in life, greed leads to ruin. People who do not know when to stop often rush toward their own demise faster than they can imagine. And for the first time in many days, I no longer felt like a victim cornered. I was beginning to see the shape of my counterattack. That weekend, my mother arrived in Boston early in the morning. She carried a large cloth bag filled with fresh vegetables and a few fish she had caught and cleaned from the lake near her home. She was still the same thin woman, her hair neatly tied back, wearing the same simple, dark brown clothes she had worn for years. But as she stepped into my condo, she examined everything carefully, not with the curiosity of a small-town person in the city, but with the eyes of someone measuring the distance from the door to the kitchen, from the dining table to the sofa, as if memorizing every corner to see who would sit where and how they would react later. I took the bag from my mother and asked softly, "Are you tired, Mom?" She shook her head. The bus ride was just over an hour. Why would I be tired? For important matters, you have to be alert. She said it quietly, but it was enough for me to understand. She had already planned every step in her head. I led her to the kitchen and poured her a glass of warm water. She had barely sat down when she asked, "What time are they coming over?" "Probably around noon." Ethan said his mother and father are coming too. My mother nodded. Good. It is better if everyone is here. My stomach tightened. A few days ago, I was in pain, I was angry, I was restless. But as the moment to sit down with my in-laws approached, my mind grew colder. Perhaps when you have been hurt too much, you no longer have the strength to tremble. That morning, I prepared the meal myself. Not to please anyone, but because I wanted everything to proceed in a very traditional way, a proper American family meal, so no one could accuse me of being disrespectful or dramatic. I roasted a whole chicken, made a pot of creamy potato soup, pan-seared some fish with a lemon dill sauce, and added a large garden salad and a dish of roasted asparagus. The aroma of roasted chicken filled the kitchen. Steam from the soup pot fogged up the window pane. It was a very familiar, very complete meal. The kind of meal I had always thought was the foundation of a decent family. Around noon, the doorbell rang. Ethan went to open the door, more quickly than usual, his voice bright. "Mom, Dad, come in. My mother is here too." Diane entered first, carrying a bag of imported fruit with the price tag still on. Today, she wore a cream-colored blouse, brand new flats, and a touch of pink lipstick. The moment she saw my mother, she beamed and walked over to take her hand. "Oh, it is so good to see you. You should have told me you were coming sooner, so I could have prepared. It has been so long since we all sat down together. If you did not know the backstory, you would have praised how close the two families were." My mother also smiled, a polite, measured smile. "It is nothing. I just came to visit the kids and have a simple meal." Richard followed behind, carrying a bottle of wine. He still had his usual slow-moving demeanor, but his eyes darted quickly around the living room before he sat down. I noticed his fingers trembled slightly as he placed the bottle on the table. An outsider might have thought it was due to age, but after hearing the recording about the high-interest loan, I only saw it as a sign of a very anxious man. Ethan was completely different that day. He proactively arranged chairs, poured water, and even peeled a tangerine for my mother first. Every gesture was perfectly polite, even a bit overly eager. Watching my husband like that, I remembered his words from the car. "Eleanor is gullible." It is true, if you know how to act, all it takes is a slight change in tone and a different look in your eye, to make people think you are a good husband and a dutiful son-in-law. At the table, we all sat down. I sat next to my mother, across from Ethan. Diane sat at one end, with Richard beside her. The warm yellow light from the overhead lamp made every dish look inviting. Ethan immediately served my mother a piece of chicken, his voice sweet. "Please, eat. This chicken is delicious." Diane quickly chimed in. "That is right. We are so used to city food," Sometimes we just crave a simple, home-style meal like this. And I must say, you raised your daughter so well. Eleanor is both capable and thoughtful. I listened and almost laughed. Not long ago, she was hinting that I was a cold, money-minded woman. Now I had become both capable and thoughtful. It is amazing how a person's words can sweeten when they have the imagined backing of a large sum of money. My mother picked up a piece of asparagus, dipped it lightly in the sauce, and then replied, "Children grow up and become their own people. We can only raise their bodies, their character is something they choose for themselves." Her words were gentle, but I understood she was sending a subtle message. Diane just smiled, unable to retort, and so she changed the subject to my work. And from my work, she steered the conversation to our living situation. "Eleanor works so hard, and this condo is a bit small, is it not? It is a shame for a young couple to be so cramped." Ethan seamlessly picked up the thread. "I was just talking to Eleanor about getting a bigger place. But these days, you have to have some vision. Just keeping money in one place is not a good idea." Richard, who had been silent until now, raised his wine glass, his voice slow and deliberate, like an elder offering wise counsel. "That is right. Money that just sits there is a waste. You have to know how to use leverage. In a family, the man has to be the one to think long-term." Hearing the word leverage from his mouth gave me a chill. A man who was trembling from high-interest loan debt was still talking about financial strategy like an expert. Truly, if I did not know better, I would have been easily convinced. My mother put her bowl down, wiped her mouth, and smiled gently. "I am a simple country woman. All this talk of leverage and investments just makes my head spin. Whatever money I have, I prefer to hold it tight." Diane immediately waved her hand. "Oh, you cannot think like that anymore. In this day and age, people who have money and just hoard it lose out. You have to let the children handle it. They are young, they have more experience. Their minds are quicker." Ethan turned to my mother, his tone full of sincere concern. "You can trust us, Mom. If you really do get that money, I think we should put it toward a bigger condo right away. It would be much more comfortable, and you could even come stay with us for a while." Hearing that, I knew the entire family was trying to push the narrative toward needing cash as soon as possible. They did not want a clean asset in my name alone. They needed money to maneuver, to patch things up, to save themselves from the deep hole they had dug. The atmosphere at the table grew thicker. On the surface, everyone was smiling, serving each other food, but every sentence was a probe, a test of reactions. I looked at the meal before me and suddenly thought of the old saying. A meal can be a bitter pill. Not because of the food, but because once money is involved, people can make themselves so small. After we were about halfway through the meal, my mother finally spoke, her voice slow, like an old woman talking about family matters to keep the peace. "I have been thinking, if I really get that compensation money, I probably will not keep it. I am old, what do I need it for? I will probably give a portion to you two to figure out a new home." The moment she said that, I saw Ethan's eyes light up. Diane sat up straighter, her hand, which had been reaching for a piece of fish, paused in midair. Richard put down his wineglass so quickly it made a soft thud. My mother continued in her even tone. "But money is a serious matter. I may be old and slow, but I am not senile. Before I hand over any money for you to manage, tomorrow morning, you two will come with me to the bank to print out your last 6 months of statements and your full credit reports for me to see." The entire table fell silent. Not the silence of people chewing, but a thick, suffocating silence, as if everyone had just had their breath knocked out of them. I looked up, directly at each of their faces, and for the first time in many days, I knew that the final squeeze had hit them exactly where it hurt the most. The air grew so cold I could hear the faint bubbling of the potato soup still simmering in the pot on the stove. The smell of chicken, fish, and roasted vegetables was still as fragrant as it had been at the start of the meal. But after my mother's words, the entire feast tasted of a cold, metallic bitterness that was hard to swallow. Ethan was the first to regain his voice. He put down his glass and forced a laugh. "Mom, that is a bit extreme. We are a respectable married couple. Why would we need to show you our credit reports?" My mother, still calmly flaking a piece of fish, replied. "If you are respectable, then it is all the more reason to be transparent. My money did not grow on trees, and it is not a small amount to be handed over with just a word." Diane immediately interjected, her voice a little higher than before. "That sounds so distant. In a family, you should trust each other. Making them print out statements and credit reports is like treating them like strangers." My mother looked up directly at her, her smile faint but her manner still polite. "Trust is important, but you have to trust with your eyes open. I am old, not senile. Richard, who had been trying to maintain his dignified air, now spoke up, his voice deliberately deep. Sarah, sometimes women are overly cautious with money. But for big things like buying a house or investing, it is best to let the men handle it. Hearing that, I tasted bitterness on my tongue. The very man talking about financial planning was the one being hounded by creditors daily. It is true, sometimes the emptiest vessels make the loudest sound. Ethan turned to me, his eyes searching, trying to see whose side I was on. Eleanor? Talk to your mother. We are her children, not strangers. I wiped my hands with a napkin, placed it on the table, and then said, I think my mother is right. The clearer things are with money, the fewer hard feelings there will be later. The moment I finished, the look in Ethan's eyes changed. The soft expression he had worn for the past few days was gone. It was just a flicker. But I saw it clearly, the same darkening I had seen when I refused to co-sign for the credit card. Diane gave a harsh laugh, still trying to keep her tone from becoming too sharp. Eleanor, you have become so meticulous lately. If a young married couple lives like they are auditing each other, what is left of the relationship? I looked up at my mother-in-law. I work in finance, Mom. I am used to clarity. And if a relationship is real, it is not afraid of paperwork. She was about to retort, but my mother placed her fork down. The sound of the metal hitting the ceramic plate was light, but it made the entire table flinch. My mother turned to me. Eleanor, get me my brown handbag from the sofa. I stood up and got it. My mother's old leather bag was soft at the handle, the zipper a bit worn. It looked no different from the bags of countless women from small towns visiting their children in the city. But only I knew that inside it right now was not fruit or clothes, but something powerful enough to tear away all the masks sitting around this table. I placed the bag on the table. My mother unzipped it slowly. No one spoke. My in-laws all watched her thin, weathered hands. From inside the bag, she pulled out a blue file folder. The moment he saw that color, Ethan's face went pale. My mother did not say much. She just pushed the folder to the center of the table, her voice even and cold. Because I am a simple country woman, I had to ask someone with more education than me. And luckily, I learned a few interesting things. I opened the folder, spreading the pages one by one on the dining table, which still smelled of a home-cooked meal. Photos of Ethan and Diane at the model condo. A copy of the $3.5 million purchase agreement. The payment schedule. The $2.8 million loan application. And then, the page with my name and the forged signature. No one was holding their forks anymore. Diane stared at the papers, her lips trembling. Richard sat frozen, his hand on his knee clenching into a tight fist. And Ethan. I had never seen my husband's face so white, the kind of white that comes from having every escape route cut off. I took out my phone and played the edited recording. Ethan's voice filled the dining room, clear and cruel. Eleanor is by the book, but she is also gullible. A few sweet words about doing it for the family, and she will come around. Just those few sentences were enough to make the entire room feel like it had been flash frozen. Ethan shot up from his chair, frantic. Eleanor, let me explain. It is not what you think. I looked up at him. For the first time in all these years, I did not soften my words with his name. What I think does not matter. What matters is what you said, in your own words. Ethan walked around the table and then, unexpectedly, knelt beside my chair. Eleanor, I was wrong. I was so cornered, I did not know what else to do. I only meant to borrow for a short time. Once things were stable, I was going to fix everything. Hearing that, Diane seemed to snap out of her stupor and immediately jumped up. Why are you on your knees? A man has to provide for his family. When times are tough, he should be able to rely on his wife. Eleanor, you are his wife. But instead of helping when your husband is in trouble, you resort to these tricks, spying, recording, taking pictures of documents. Do you think you are so clever? My mother turned, her gaze sharp as a blade. Watch your words. Your husband and your son forged my daughter's signature to take on a $2.8 million loan. And now you are trying to lecture her on morality? Richard tried to protest. I did not know anything about a signature. I looked him straight in the eye, my voice calm and cold. What about the over $700,000 from high-interest loans to cover your gambling debts? What about the threatening texts? The collection calls? How much more are you going to deny? The moment I said that, it was as if Richard's spine had been removed. His shoulders slumped. Ethan was still kneeling, his head bowed. Eleanor, give me one more chance. I placed my hand on the folder, my words falling like stones. From the moment you forged my signature on this loan, our marriage was dead. The moment my words fell, the kitchen was plunged back into a thick, suffocating silence. The exhaust fan overhead continued its steady, dry whir. The soup in the pot on the stove had gone cold, a thin layer of fat congealing on the surface. More than half the meal was left, but no one had the appetite for another bite. Ethan remained on the tiled floor, his hands gripping the edge of my chair, his voice trembling. "Eleanor, I am begging you. I know I was wrong, but I was truly backed into a corner. I never intended to hurt you. I just thought I could get through this period, turn things around, and pay it back. The paperwork could have been corrected." I looked down at the man who had been my husband. His face was pale, his hair damp with sweat, a stark contrast to the polished, composed image he presented to the world. But strangely, I no longer felt any pity. Perhaps when you have heard enough words of contempt, you stop feeling compassion for the pitiful appearance of the one who caused you pain. $2.8 million, I said, enunciating each word. You call that a temporary loan? You used my name, my signature, and pushed me into a massive legal liability, and you call it temporary? Ethan looked up, his lips moving. I was going to tell you. I just had not found the right time. I let out a dry laugh. The right time? When? When the bank sent a foreclosure notice to our home, or when I was dragged into court to pay the debts for your entire family? That question was like a knife, severing the last of Ethan's pleading tone. He bowed his head, unable to answer. Seeing her son cornered, Diane could no longer sit still. She slammed her hand on the table, her voice sharp. Enough of this. Why are you making it sound like the end of the world? A husband and wife are supposed to support each other through hardship. Whatever he did it for this family, for our future. You act like you are the only victim here. I turned to look at her. This was my mother-in-law's true face. No more sweetness, no more sugarcoating, no more pretense of sisterly affection. Just a woman furious that a prize she was about to claim had been snatched away. What future, Diane? I asked, my voice even. The future where you and your husband get the master suite, and your son and I get the small bedroom? Or the future where your whole family lives in a luxury condo while I carry the weight of the debt? Diane was speechless for a moment, then she spat. You overheard a few words and blew them out of proportion. It is true what they say, you can never really trust someone who isn't blood. My mother, sitting beside me, put down her water glass and said, concisely and firmly, not blood might be true. But as for whose heart is rotten, I think everyone here can see that clearly today. Richard, who had been silent, finally spoke, trying to cling to a final shred of dignity. Whatever the issue, we should handle it privately. Every family has its problems. If you make a scene like this, what will people think of us? I looked at him, remembering the phrase, get that money, no matter what from the recording, and I found it laughable. Dignity? You are talking about dignity now? When you were taking out high-interest loans, when you were gambling, when you were pushing your own son to forge his wife's signature, did you think about dignity then? Richard's face flushed red, then went pale. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but ended up just exhaling sharply, his eyes averting mine. Ethan, seeing that begging was no longer working, changed his tone. I knew it, the moment he pushed himself up, stood, and pulled a chair to sit across from me instead of continuing to kneel. That small shift was enough to tell me he was moving from pleading to bargaining. Eleanor, he said, trying to regain his composure. I admit I was wrong. But we can still resolve this quietly. There is no need to escalate things. Whatever you want, we can discuss. I looked straight at him. You think this is a negotiation at a flea market? No, Ethan shook his head, his voice softer. I mean, we can still handle this within the family. Do not go to the bank, do not involve the police or the courts. We both have our reputations to think about. I laughed, and this time, I did not hold back. Reputation? I emphasized the word. When you told your mother I was gullible, when you tricked me into signing those papers, when your entire family was targeting my mother's money to pay off your debts, where was my reputation? Ethan was speechless. I pulled the file folder toward me, my hand flat on its blue cover. Listen carefully. I will be getting the signature authenticated. I will be contacting the bank. I will demand the cancellation of this fraudulent cosigner agreement. And I am filing for divorce. The last 3 words landed like stones, sending ripples of shock through the room. Diane practically shot out of her chair. Divorce? You think you can just decide that? This family is not a place you can just walk in and out of as you please. I turned to her, not a trace of softness left in my voice. I am not asking for your permission. My mother added, her tone calmly chilling, and let me make it clear to you both. From now on, any documents related to my daughter will go through her lawyer. If anyone tries any more tricks, threats, or cover-ups, I will take this entire file straight to the authorities. Diane opened her mouth to argue, but this time, it was Ethan who raised a hand to stop her. Perhaps he finally understood that things had gone too far for him to use guilt or family duty to control me anymore. I stood up from the table. My legs were not shaking, and my heart was no longer racing. It was strange. When I first found the file in the safe, I thought I would collapse. Yet at the moment of making my final decision, my mind felt as clear as if I had just broken a long fever. I spoke slowly. This meal is over. And as of tonight, I am not hosting any more guests in this home. I would like you all to leave. All three of them stared at me, as if they could not believe that the daughter-in-law who had been so patient for so many years could say something so final. But I knew that some doors, once you close them firmly, you never have to live with the smell of smoke from the wreckage again. After that evening, I did not cry again. I moved my personal belongings to the spare room, locked the drawer containing my documents, changed my email and bank passwords, and sent all the evidence to a backup location that only my mother knew about. Ethan sent a few long texts asking to talk and called nonstop for 2 nights, but I did not answer. Some things, once broken, cannot be pieced back together with a few sorries. I had expected his family to lie low for a while to plan their next move. I never imagined they would resort to the oldest trick in the book. Showing up at my workplace to cause a scene, hoping that bystanders would hear one side of the story and believe it. It was a Monday, around 11 in the morning. I was reviewing a disbursement schedule for the project when the internal phone rang urgently. It was Lauren, the receptionist from the lobby, her voice panicked. "Eleanor, can you please come down? There is an older woman sitting in the reception area, crying loudly, saying you left your husband, stole the house, and kicked your in-laws out. Security tried to ask her to leave, but she is refusing." My fingers paused on the keyboard. For a split second, I knew exactly who it was. I stood up, straightened my collar, grabbed my phone, and walked out. My colleague Sarah looked up. "What is going on?" I replied briefly, "I just need to go down to the lobby for a minute." The elevator ride felt excruciatingly slow. In those few seconds inside the glass cabin, I could hear my own heart beating, but my mind was strangely clear. I knew what Diane was trying to do. For a finance professional like me, the most valuable asset at work is not just my salary, but my reputation. By making a scene in the lobby in front of partners, colleagues, and clients, even if I was in the right, I would be the one forced to explain myself. Most people do not have the patience to hear the whole story. They only remember the image of a distraught mother-in-law, hair disheveled, eyes red, wailing in the main lobby. The elevator doors opened. From a distance, I could already hear Diane's voice. "I am so miserable, everyone. I raised my son all these years, only for him to marry a cruel woman who, the moment she got a little money, turned on him, brought her own mother to intimidate us, and then threw us out of our home." She was sitting on the floor next to the guest sofa, crumpled tissues beside her, her usually neat hair now in disarray. Her voice rose and fell, breaking at just the right moments to sound utterly heartbroken. A few clients waiting for appointments had turned to stare. The young staff at the reception desk were at a loss. The security guard kept his distance, afraid to touch her and escalate the situation. I walked toward her. The moment Diane saw me, she pointed a finger. "There, that is her. The kind of woman who gets a little power and thinks she owns the world. If your husband makes a mistake, you talk about it behind closed doors. You do not throw his parents out onto the street." I did not interrupt her. I did not walk over to argue. I just turned to Lauren. "Can you ask IT to help me connect my phone to the lobby's LED screen?" Lauren was stunned. "Yes, of course." Diane stopped crying mid-sob, probably not expecting this reaction. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she still raised her voice. "What kind of trick are you trying to pull now?" I looked at her, my voice as calm as ice. "No tricks. I just think that in a public place, it is best to speak with evidence, so no one is wrongly accused." The IT technician brought the cable out quickly. The large screen, which had been displaying promotional images of our company's projects, went black and then mirrored my phone's display. The entire lobby fell silent. The first thing I opened was the photo of the condo purchase agreement and the cosigner page with the forged signature, zooming in on every line. Then I spoke, my tone as concise as if I were delivering a report in a boardroom. "This is a loan application for $2.8 million for a $3.5 million condo. My name is listed as a cosigner. However, I had no prior knowledge of this transaction, and did not willingly sign this document. I swiped to the next photo. Ethan and Diane at the model condo. A murmur went through the crowd behind me. Then I played the edited audio recording. Ethan's voice echoed through the lobby, sharp and clear. Eleanor is by the book, but she is also gullible. A few sweet words about doing it for the family, and she will come around. Diane looked as if she had been slapped. She shot up from the floor, her lips trembling, her eyes wide with shock. The tearful, heartbroken act from moments before vanished completely, leaving only a woman who had been exposed in the very place she had come to slander someone else. I turned off the recording and looked directly at her. Do you have anything else to say about who stole whose house, or who threw whom out on the street? No one in the lobby said a word. There was only the sound of the air conditioning and Diane's ragged breathing. She bowed her head, snatched her handbag, and scurried through the crowd, running more than walking, without another sob or tear. I stood still for a few seconds, then turned to everyone and bowed my head. I apologize for disrupting the work environment. That was all. I did not say another word. Because at that moment, I understood something very clearly. Some people will always mistake your silence for weakness. It is only when the truth speaks that they realize the cost of trying to tarnish the wrong person is often much higher than they ever imagined. That very afternoon, I took a half-day off to meet with my lawyer, Mr. Thompson, along with my mother. His office was on the third floor of a modest brownstone in the back bay. The sign was simple, and inside, the smell of new paper and hot tea created an atmosphere that was serious but not cold. Mr. Thompson was in his late 40s, with thin-rimmed glasses and a calm, unpretentious way of speaking. After listening to my entire story, he said, "The first thing you need to do is separate your emotions from the case. Whatever can be proven, we keep. Whatever is just speculation, we put aside for now." I nodded. His words were dry, but reassuring. After so many days of being dragged through a mess of money and emotion, I was finally hearing a language I could understand. I gave him everything. The photos of the documents, the recordings, transaction histories, receipts, timelines, and even the handwritten notes I had compiled like a risk assessment report. Mr. Thompson reviewed everything meticulously, occasionally pausing to ask a pointed question or two before continuing. When he finished, he looked up. "Your path forward is quite clear. This cosigner agreement is likely void if you did not directly and willingly enter into the transaction. We will do 3 things simultaneously." My mother immediately asked, "What 3 things?" He ticked them off on his fingers. 1. We request a forensic analysis of the signature and the context in which it was signed. 2. We demand the bank provide its entire file on the loan application process, including identity verification and guarantor confirmation procedures. 3. We gather evidence of the source of funds for your current condo to prepare for the asset division in the divorce. Hearing the word divorce still caused a slight pang in my chest, but I was no longer trembling. By then, the word in my mind was no longer a wound, but a procedure I had to go through to reclaim the rest of my life. The following weeks were a tense whirlwind. I worked during the day and sorted through files with my mother at night. We dug up old bank statements, wire transfer records from when my mother gave me the money for the down payment, monthly mortgage statements, the original loan agreement, and even the small transaction notes I never thought I would need to prove my own case. Some nights, I was still sitting under my desk lamp at midnight, my eyes aching but my mind sharp. People say they lose sleep over heartbreak. I was losing sleep to piece together the truth to save my own life. During that time, Ethan's behavior was as unpredictable as the wind. Sometimes he would send long texts admitting his mistakes and begging to see me, to preserve some shred of decency. Other times, he would hint through mutual acquaintances that if I escalated things, both our reputations would be ruined. I did not reply. I forwarded all communication from him to my lawyer. Richard and Diane went completely silent, the silence of people who know that saying anything more will only reveal more weaknesses. The signature analysis was conducted first. I had to provide multiple signature samples on the spot, under various conditions, for the expert to compare with the signature on the loan document. Just the act of signing my name over and over again made my heart ache. The same strokes, the same name. In one context, it was my willing consent, in another, it had been twisted into a lock, chaining my life to a colossal debt. The bank was evasive at first, citing internal procedures, confidentiality, and every excuse to delay providing the files. But Mr. Thompson was relentless. Official letters were sent back and forth, and a formal request was filed. Eventually, the cracks began to show. There was no clear visual confirmation that I had been physically present for the cosigner agreement. The identity verification records were sloppy. A few key dates even conflicted with my work schedule at the office. Each seemingly small discrepancy, when placed together, painted a picture of appalling negligence. Then, the court date arrived. That morning, the Boston sky was overcast, and a raw early winter wind whipped through the courthouse corridors. I wore a pale gray dress my mother had picked out not to appear weak or to win sympathy, but because she said, "You go in there with your head held high. No one has the right to look at you like you are the one at fault." Ethan sat on the opposite side. It had only been a few months, but he had lost a significant amount of weight. His eyes were sunken, his complexion sallow. It was the same face, but the polished confidence of the past was gone. Richard sat in the row behind him, his back held straight, but his expression was weary. Diane also looked haggard, no amount of makeup could hide her decline. Mr. Thompson presented each point clearly. The expert analysis concluded that the signature on the loan document was not the result of a properly and willingly executed agreement. The bank could not prove that I had participated in all the necessary steps. Their own records showed procedural errors. The evidence regarding the source of funds for our current condo was also presented. The vast majority was from the money my mother gave me and my own accumulated salary, while Ethan's actual contribution was minimal. I sat and listened, my hands resting on my knees. My palms were cold, but my mind was clear. This was no longer about who could tell a better story. This was about layers of truth and deception being peeled back under the light of the law. When the verdict was read, the courtroom held its breath. The judge declared my cosigner obligation on the $2.8 million loan to be void. I would bear no legal responsibility for a debt established with a flawed and non-consensual application. Regarding our current condo, based on the source of funds and contributions, the court awarded me the majority of the equity. Ethan was granted a much smaller portion than his family had ever imagined they could claim. Hearing that, I closed my eyes for a slow second. Not to cry, but to tell myself that finally, my name had been pulled out of the mud. But ironically, the assets Ethan did receive could not save him. Immediately following the judgment, due to his other debts and enforcement actions from his creditors, that money was frozen. In other words, the man who had schemed and calculated to get a luxury home, to use his wife's back to carry his debts, ended up not being able to hold a single clean dollar in his hand. I walked out of the courthouse with my mother and Mr. Thompson. The air was still cold, but for some reason, I could breathe much more easily. My mother walked beside me and said quietly, "See? When you do the right thing, you have nothing to fear." I did not reply right away, just squeezed her hand. Because for the first time in months, I truly believed that justice does not always come quickly, but as long as you do not give up, it will eventually knock on the right door. After the trial, my former in-law's life did not collapse overnight. It slowly sank, like soft ground in a heavy rain. Each month brought a new problem, each problem another stone on their shoulders. First was Ethan. Just over a month after the verdict, he was fired from his job at the bank. The reason was concise: violation of professional ethics, accumulating bad debt, and damaging the company's reputation. The man who had been so skilled at maintaining his image, who walked out every day in a crisp shirt and a polite voice, was ultimately shut out by the very industry he had been so proud of. Then came the $3.5 million condo. The $700,000 down payment had been from high-interest loans. Now, with no money to continue making payments, the developer issued penalties, and the bank moved to foreclose. Everything became a tangled mess. The condo was repossessed, and a huge portion of the money they had put in was lost. When I heard about it, I did not feel any petty sense of satisfaction, only the resigned thought that greed truly does lead to ruin. The old proverbs are never wrong. Richard, after weeks of being harassed by creditors, fell ill. One afternoon, the loan sharks reportedly came to their new, smaller rental apartment and banged on the door. He panicked and suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. The man who used to sit and drink tea while pontificating on a man's duty to think big was now confined to a bed in a cramped rented room, his eyes open but his mouth twisted to one side, unable to speak a clear sentence. Diane had to take a night shift at a diner washing dishes, prepping vegetables, mopping floors. An acquaintance of a colleague of mine happened to see her and later told me she had become gaunt, her hair had turned gray, and her hands were always cracked and raw from the dishwater. As for Ethan, he went from entertaining clients at fancy restaurants to driving for a rideshare service, working as a mover, and handing out flyers, anything to make money. But a name with a bad credit history is like a shadow that follows you everywhere. As for me, after finalizing the last of the legal paperwork, I went back to the old condo to pack up the rest of my things. That afternoon, sunlight slanted through the window, casting thin yellow streaks on the floor. Everything was still there: the curtains I had chosen, the dining table I had wiped every morning, the shoe cabinet I had organized myself. Only my heart no longer belonged to this place. I pulled open the drawer of the nightstand. The moss green velvet box was still inside. I opened the lid. The fake green stone necklace glittered in the light, just as it had on our anniversary night. Under the lining, the old receipt was still there. I looked at it for a long time and then gave a dry laugh. The thing that had once caused me so much pain now felt like just a piece of paper, a reminder that some things look bright on the outside but are completely hollow within. I gathered the wedding photos, a few old letters, some small gifts, and that velvet box into a large bag. I did not burn them, I did not tear them up, and I did not cling to them. I just threw them all away, like discarding a part of my life that had expired. Then, I sold the condo. Not because I needed the money, but because I did not want to spend another night in a place that held so many lies. For my new home, I chose a smaller, brighter apartment, closer to my mother. The living room was not large, but it had a balcony that caught the morning sun. The kitchen was just big enough for a small dining table. Everything was neat, warm, and clean. The feeling of stepping into a place with no old smells, no old memories, was like taking off a damp coat I had been wearing for years. The evening I finished moving in, my mother sat on the sofa drinking a cup of hot tea and suddenly said, "There is something I have to tell you." I was arranging plates on a shelf and turned to look at her. "What is it, Mom?" She smiled faintly, a smile that was both gentle and clever. "That $800,000 compensation story. I made it up." I stood frozen. My mother continued calmly, "The farmland back home, it is true someone was interested in buying it, and a project was planned nearby, but nowhere near 800,000. All told, it was probably worth a few tens of thousands at most. I am not rich enough to bring a pile of cash to save you, honey. I just have a clear head. When I see greedy people, I know you have to throw them the right bait to make them expose themselves." I looked at my mother, a lump forming in my throat. I knew she was a strategic thinker, but only at that moment did I understand the depth of it. This small-town woman who had worn simple clothes and saved every penny her whole life, had single-handedly devised a trap to pull her daughter out of a pit. Before I could say anything, my mother pulled a cloth cover off something in the corner of the living room. A digital piano, in a dark wood finish, was revealed. I was speechless. When I was a little girl, I had loved the piano. I used to stand outside the local community center, listening to the music, just staring through the door. But we were poor, my father had passed away, and my mother was raising me alone. Piano lessons were a luxury I never dared to ask for. Later, caught up in work and marriage, that dream had faded even further away. My mother gently touched the side of the piano, her voice soft. "The real money from selling the land, plus a little I had saved up, was enough to buy you this. It is not the most expensive one, but it is enough for you to start again." I burst into tears like a child. This time, I was not crying from pain, or anger, or betrayal. I was crying because I understood. The richest person in my life was never the man who had painted pictures of a fancy house. The richest person was my mother, who did not have millions of dollars but had enough love and wisdom to save her daughter from a cleverly laid trap. 6 months later, I was officially promoted to Chief Financial Officer. On the day I received the appointment, I wore a deep blue dress and stood in the large conference room, a strange sense of peace in my heart. There was no one standing beside me to share the joy in a husband and wife way, but I did not feel a void. Because for the first time in years, I knew that what I had earned and protected myself. One weekend evening, I took my mother to the supermarket. We were standing by the discounted vegetable bin when I looked over and saw Diane. She was wearing a faded old coat, her hair was unkempt, and her back was stooped as she picked through some wilted greens. In just a few months, she had aged so much that if I had not looked closely, I might not have recognized her. She looked up, and our eyes met. Her face went pale, her hand, holding a bunch of spinach, froze in midair. I thought she would say something, make an excuse, beg for forgiveness, or at least quickly walk away. But she did not. She just lowered her head and stood there, motionless, as if all her strength had been drained away. My mother gently squeezed my hand. I knew what she meant, but I just quietly pushed our cart and moved on. I did not need to be sarcastic, nor did I need to rub it in. Some prices, life has a way of collecting in full. That night, back home, I opened the piano and began to learn the first few notes. On the balcony, a light breeze rustled the mint plant. In the distance, the city lights glowed with a warm yellow. My mother sat on the sofa, knitting a scarf while listening to my clumsy playing. The music was not perfect, but my heart felt full with a gentle warmth, as if after a long storm, I had finally found my way to a safe harbor. I had come to understand something very clearly. I had not lost a home. I had only lost the shell of a marriage that had long been empty. What I had kept was what was truly precious: my dignity, my independence, my career, and my mother's unconditional love. In this life, a woman can love someone deeply, but no matter how deep, she should never lose herself. Because as long as you hold on to your self-respect and a clear mind, when the storm passes, you can always build a new sky for yourself. The lesson of this story is perhaps very simple. In marriage, it is good to trust, but not to be blind. Loving others is a precious thing, but loving yourself correctly is even more precious. And when it comes to money, documents, and dignity, the closer the relationship, the clearer the lines need to be, so that one day, you do not find yourself crying tears that have nowhere to fall but inward.